Thanks very much. I was just enjoying listening to the presentation, and it is both in terms of the introduction. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, both in terms of the introduction and the presentation. It represents such an incredible richness. You know, so I have some folks here who I've worked with a lot, right? And it's very important. I mean, I know Professor Harris mentioned and said I'm a retired professor, you know, and that's wonderful. But Professor Harris and I have spent 20, 25 years working together, building economies, right? The last thing he did was the growth strategy for Jamaica, and he built the industrial policy, and he most recently was brought over into England to study why Brexit happened and build a framework for human-centric development. Now, why do I say this? Because as I heard the conversation, I was imagining the synergies and the things that you're talking about, how it's going to build community. And I would say that my curiosity and my interest, right? I mean, you heard Rico, who is a senior VP at PNC Bank and also who's from Baltimore. My daughter, who's doing work here on Medicaid, but also it's about the social well-being. That's what I heard you talking about.
Yes, sir.
The young people outside who you want to get away from these things, right? It's the culture of the place that's going to make that matter. It's the culture of creating a place that people value, that people want to invest in perpetuating, that people want to celebrate each other and celebrate it. I can tell you that that's the most important foundational asset that is going to be important in you owning and transforming this rich place with its culture and with all of its aspects. So we can talk about all the economic aspects and all the business aspects, but if we don't have those foundational assets that I hear you speaking of, the culture of the community, the foundational skills of people caring for each other, right, to make sure that people can do these things, the basic skills, what you're talking about, what makes that skill respond to his question is not because it is treating a specific job, but it is teaching the skills and the emotions of having a job, which is going to allow people to transform into wherever the world of work is taken. The idea that they understand what it is to complete a task, they understand what it is to critically evaluate and do things. That's what I heard when you were talking about the administrator, this and that. I wasn't necessarily hearing a specific job as much as a skill, a habit, an approach towards being able to create some things. And what I think I would like to listen and hear some more about, just based on what I heard about people as they introduce themselves, is about how they can also create wealth through the creative processes that I heard some of you talk about. That's a very important creative process of creating wealth. Through working with the institutions and having the institutions understand how their public good can be working together with community to create new kinds of value that the community can own its experience. And that's very important because this is Baltimore. And as I was explaining to people, whether it is Baltimore or Jamaica or Appalachia or Tanzania or Honduras or other places where I've had the privilege of working with communities, the one thing that they all had taken from them was their right to own their lives. It's not about the infrastructure, it's not about the buildings, it's about the right to own their lives and to have agency to be able to transform their lives and transform their aspirations in what they want. So I'm hearing about the aspirations and I'm very excited about this group. In fact, I was going to say to Prof. Harris, I said, wow, as people were introducing themselves, I said, what richness. You and I have worked in places and we understand the richness that we just heard. Right? I mean, you have advised countries all over the world. That's one of the top professors, leading scholars from Stanford University, but it's about the richest. Nothing is as rich as what we've heard here. And what I'm saying is, if we can somehow work to organize, right? And I'll tell you to end, the simplest way to understand this, governments naturally are organized through their political process, through their administrative processes. Businesses are naturally organized through trade groups. The hardest part and the hardest group or collective to organize is community. Community is the hardest to organize. And the problem is that if government and the private sector can organize, then what happens is, don't be fooled by this public-private partnership. It means that the government and the private sector make the community's life residual in that process. You get what's left over. And the only way that you can make sure that you are part of the concept, the construction of the architecture of your economic reality, is if you also then learn to organize. And so the Historic Art Social Club, there's a reason why it has lasted how long. It's because it is rich in its culture. Now that culture has to become the spine of the community organizing so that it can represent itself in this larger discussion and negotiation about its future. And the nature of the work that I do, that we do, is to be a vehicle for a community's aspiration in organizing to represent how it can own its future. So I just say that to you to say that I'm excited to be here, to listen and to hear, and and it's very, very rich what I've heard, and I continue to listen to see whether I believe that I could collaborate in encouraging a kind of a cooperation that could make the community own and make its aspirations transform the place into what it wants to achieve. So thank you very much for the privilege of listening in, but I want to tell you that it's really exciting to hear your richness. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'll take a question if anyone has any questions. So then
we're going to do, well, here we got a thing. I'm going to say just a couple of words, because I suppose the fact that two people from Kentucky is here, it's like, why are you all here? And I think that's a really important question, and it goes right off of, I'm generally asked why the hell am I here wherever I am, but that's another issue. My name is Ben Fink. I am the lead organizer of a project called Performing Our Future. And we are, so Becca and I work at a grassroots theater company in the coal fields of East Kentucky. And we have worked with Flooney on a project for several years. What are we doing? Got it. Okay, cool. Got to set up the camera shot right. Otherwise nothing else matters. So Flooney started working with us maybe about 6 years ago. And he comes to the coal fields of East Kentucky. He says, "I'm home. I come from the mountains of Jamaica. We're in the mountains of Kentucky. We have bauxite. You have coal, but it's the same thing." And specifically, the same thing was an economy based on extracting the riches of the land and taking it away, and extracting the labor and resources of the people and taking it away, being justified by a culture that says, sit down, shut up, there are no options in your lives, get back in that coal mine, otherwise you're going to starve. And that's what happened. Culture drove that development. And what Flooney really pushed us to think about is, how could we do a different kind of development driven by a different kind of culture? A kind of culture that is about making together and owning what we make. So out of that came this nascent approach to development that's symbolized by that triangle on the back of the power map. If you look at the back of the power map, you'll notice I'm into like abstract diagrams, and so I've given you a couple of them.
Yeah.
And so this is really came directly out of what Flooney was just saying, that for a community to own its developments, it's got to be able to tell its own story, build its own power, and create its own wealth. And those things working together, the cultural work, the organizing, and the development, all working together with people that do it professionally and people that don't do it professionally working as equals, that is the way we can create a future where we own what we make. We did this in the coal fields of East Kentucky. Organization called the Letcher County Culture Hub started right around the same time that the Arts Social Community Network started, bringing people together just in one county of East Kentucky who had never worked with each other before, who had never recognized that they could build together on their own terms, who had not, as Flooney would say, unbounded their imaginations and recognized the possibilities that were in front of them, not because some smartass from Connecticut came down and told them so, but because we're right there. We're right there, and just you put them together in a space, you make theater together, you make other creative work together, and you recognize all that you had. Businesses came out of it, initiatives came out of it, revived cultural events came out of it. The biggest homegrown alternative energy project in the history of the East Kentucky coal fields came out of it, run by people who really like coal, and some of them even like our president, working alongside communist Jews from the Northeast and many others down there who have very different politics. Point being, that's what we did in East Kentucky. And then a couple of years ago, we realized we're only going to be so strong doing that work if we're in one county in East Kentucky. And we started looking around for allies. Who is out there doing this exact same work in these exact same circumstances, but we have long been told we got nothing to do with each other because we're from a different part of the country. Right. We're rural, they're urban. We're mostly white, they're mostly black. All those things. And that is how we are here tonight. And it is a thrill to be here with all you all and to be able to share some of this. And I can speak in detail, which I will not right now, to the way this collaboration worked in East Kentucky, but I'll tell you it started with an ugly looking diagram just like that power map right there. And so what we want to ask you to do tonight is to help us build this thing. And thinking about what you just heard from Flooney, what you heard from John and Jahi and Denise, what you know, what you are bringing into this room, what you see on that power map there, which is incomplete, and we know it's incomplete and we want your help in building it. We want to start a community discussion with the rest of the time we've got tonight with 2 questions. I want you to think about these questions and spend just a few minutes talking about them with the people around you. And then we'll start hearing as a group. Question number 1. From everything you've heard, from everything you see, what questions do you have? What questions are on your mind? And a question could be something that's not clear, or a question could be, what about this thing that we haven't talked about? So any questions, and which leads into number 2, what opportunities do you see? Because what you see on that diagram, what you've heard tonight, is a whole lot of potential that now a whole lot of us are working to resolve together. Flooney and his partners working on the economic side, Roadside Theater working with local theater makers, working to make a community play about the future of West Baltimore, and the Arts Social Community Network doing the organizing work. All together, those 3 points of the triangle, we're beginning a process of realizing this potential. So what questions do you have, and what opportunities do you see?
And just before the conversation, we want to ask too about guests to give us a couple of minutes of what you do, who you are, why you're here, and so on and so forth.
Just so.
Go ahead, Mr. Flooney's daughter.
No. I'm just going to ask.
Oh no.
I'm going to ask 3 persons just to speak for 2 minutes because I think there's a richness to what they do. I mean, he's quiet, Professor Harris, but he has built some of the great human-centric developments around the world, and some of the great things. He is here, I mean, one of the top professors in the world on this. Prof, could you just speak for 2 minutes? Yeah? He's quiet, so if the mic can reach him, then...
Is it on?
It's going to be in just a minute.
Just push it over to him because he doesn't speak loud.
Okay.
So
Right, he speaks softly.
give him the mic. 2 minutes, and then I'm going to ask Rico and Julie.
I just want to reinforce the arguments and the positions stated by Lorraine and by Trent. These are 2 people whom I've known for some time. Ben indirectly because all I know about him is what Chloe has
Put the
told me.
mic a little closer.
And can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I just would like to make a couple of quick points. First of all, thank you so much, Ms. Johnson, for inviting me. I really feel honored to be here, and especially for a reason which I'd like to explain. That you know, in all my years working on economic development, studying economic development, developing and recommending policies for economic development, there's one very important, small but fundamentally important thing that experience has taught me. And it is that the beginning, the start, the nurturing moment for the emergence of a momentum for development occurs at the community level. Everything starts at the community in that respect. And it is to me the most heartening thing, Ms. Johnson, the most thrilling thing to have been invited here, because from the research I've been doing on Europe history, your activities, and the way in which this group has nurtured this community and has grown in this community and has made long-term commitments, developed firm roots in this community. This is, to me, the foundation on which you can build an enormously successful culture, economy, and social life. And I think, in fact, this is what I see here now, in all of this richness, a tremendous foundation on which to build. And most important of all, the thing which has struck me upon discussions with people who are here, the key component of community life, which creates that platform for successful innovation and economic enterprise, is trust. And I did
Sir, I'm sorry, because that's important. We want to hear. Can you put the mic a little closer?
Yes, I was saying that the key component of your foundation here, the key element in what you have yourself developed as a result of your long history and the roots that you have built in this community, is the element of trust. All of those children feel free to come here and live and experience the activities including engaging them in. They feel they don't have to have their parents around to guide them. In this age, that's a very important issue of trust in communities. Having your children get access to community life without being monitored and restricted and controlled by the parents. And once you have that element of trust, along with all of the other rich cultural elements that you create, the dance, the theater, the artistic events, music, all of those things add up as a synergy and as a complementary set of assets with which you can now do the creative things that Ben is encouraging that you do, like engaging new activities, like exploring what new developments you can do with housing in the community. I was struck by the story that you told about the properties that you've acquired. These are important components of building up the base for future development. And let me just add one last thing. You know, in my travels around, in and around this country, I'm always forced to recognize an extraordinary thing, that the cultural the nerve center of entertainment activity and the creative aspects in the music and cultural manifestation of this United States typically comes out of black communities in urban centers. All across this country, whether Beale Street in Memphis, Fillmore in San Francisco, Southside Chicago, 125th Street in New York, well, why not Pennsylvania Avenue, Baltimore? That's where it used to be back in the days of the origin of the culture group. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
That's where it was, right at this intersection. Well, why could not that be restored and revivified by the efforts of building and engaging commerce and carrying on a whole lot of exploratory activities that would enable you to make that come to life. That's what I would encourage. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Sorry, I'm gonna ask Rico. Rico doesn't need it. You don't need it. I'm gonna ask Rico.
I need to ask for, to lessen your time. I thank you, sir.
The 2 minutes, Rico.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah.
Rico Collins, as formerly stated, I work in the public finance practice at PNC Bank. So my primary job is literally to go out, interact with the state, local governments, not-for-profits, colleges, and universities around the state, and then Washington and Virginia. So literally, the streetlights, finance the streetlights, the ambulances, the roads, the books in the school system. So that's my primary job. Been doing that for some time, and I've always had a civic mind, but never thought that, never really tied it to my job. But something I recently started doing is real estate development in Baltimore. You drive up and down the city, around the city, you see tons of blight around the city. So something on a real estate project a couple of years ago, and literally complete gut job, did the project, and I've never felt more satisfied after completing that project. It was one of those things where something that was completely neglected. It had the structure, but just needed a little tender love and care. And we literally brought that property back to being something. And not only did we bring that property back, it also started a revitalization of an entire neighborhood. So that's something where I've focused a lot of my energy now. Although I do the bank, I probably spend the remaining waking hours doing the real estate development thing, because I want to actually help to revitalize communities. To hear you guys say you got, the 17 lots, the 9 properties that you're working on standing, that's what it's actually going to take. And I was talking to Becca a minute ago. We need to figure out how I'm willing to help and figure out how can we get some patient capital in this neighborhood so that the people can actually, you can develop those properties and actually have somebody give you capital that's going to be patient in time enough to raise the values. You're not going to do all 30, 40 at one time, but you can, if you can do them in tranches, I think that's a key thing to revitalize this community. There's a lot. We got the Epic Center here, and if we can build out from this center out with real estate development, like we hear about the state and local government talking about, to your point, the public-private partnership, to where they want to bring all that money to Penn North. It's not money, it's proximity. We need people who actually in the community that want to be a part of the community, that are going to stay here and have roots in the community. So, any way I can help in respect to, what you guys are trying to do from a real estate development standpoint, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to get boots on the ground and help me figure it all out.
Okay, there are 2 minutes are up, and the central point of Rico's 2 minutes is about the importance of awakening latent assets so that it can be well created for the community's purpose. Yeah? Julie, I'm going to ask you to speak on the other side of things, well-being issues. Why that, everything you've heard fits into that, right? And, again, she is my boss, my daughter, but she's one of those people who decided to not stay at Harvard, but to be here because she wanted to invest in Baltimore, and she's now working on this stuff. Yeah, go ahead, just for 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me this evening. So I currently work in Medicaid and Medicare for the federal government. But prior to that, I had been studying economic development, mainly because these are my family members. And so I think what I saw is I was very interested in understanding some of the resources that our government does spend on certain communities. And so I ended up in Iowa on a Medicaid project. And I think ultimately, we're in a very critical time in this country when it comes to healthcare, where there has been shifts from talking about how healthcare costs too much money to trying to find ways to have communities be healthier from the beginning. And whether that is from the government's perspective to save dollars, ultimately it aligns very much at this moment in time with what I care about, which is having communities be healthy, have education, have access to transportation, and all of these things, so that in the long run you have a healthier community. And for where I work now, that means lower costs, but I think ultimately they are looking to invest and align with all resources in communities to address these issues and put all of these assets together. So I think that's the other part of the puzzle as well.
So Don, that's our comprehensive overall, everything creates an ecosystem for you to drive your own development and own it, your community.
So I'm gonna ask Michael Scott to just talk about what it is that you do, which fits in well to all of this that we've been having. Then we're gonna move into these questions.
Okay, I'm Michael Scott of Equity Matters. Not sure which hat you wanted me to wear.
Whatever hat you want
So
to, Mike.
my background is merchant banking. In fact, I was telling Doc here that I came into merchant banking from some Chinese Jamaican bankers, Paul Chen Young. But most people know me from Equity Matters, and people that know me a long time from finance say, do you mean financial equity or social justice equity? And I say, yes. What's the difference? Whose deals get done, whose grants get funded is a matter of equity. So part of what we do, and some of you all have done this, is we facilitate hard conversations that are related to these two questions. I've worked with a lot of folks in the room, UMBC. I'm working with Intersections of Change over at Kaiser, Mama Kay, and many other members. Milan left, Family Service, Survivor Network, we're on deck for some stuff. But really, the hard questions about racism that relate to power and ownership. And if we don't have a language to talk about, because you talk about creating value and community wealth creation. When I was in the CDC for Columbia Heights, so I asked, who's wealth creation? Right? We already have value. But how that's leveraged into actual ownership and ongoing return on investment is a conversation we have to have, right? Because I was there for CDC in DC. I see who owns it now. All those other places, we got family in Harlem. You can't afford to be in Fillmore, in Frisco. You can't afford to be, right? So these are hard questions. So in terms of the questions that I want to ask is, who in this room is being funded by whom? Who in this room, white, has a job that someone black in this room is doing or has done or could do? Those are hard questions, right? And to the extent that we have those answers, what is the intention of collaboration, right? How do we build power in places where it's inequitably already built so that treating things equally doesn't change the power dynamic? Like, we have to have those conversations, otherwise we're going to get DC. So part of what I do is complexity science, network science, making maps like this and saying, all right, first let's analyze which system is feeding which systems. Then let's make a map of who we know, what the power dynamics are. And they tell me not to say unless I have my little diagram. I call it the evil beaver diagram. Now, this is strange, but like, if you can imagine a beaver damming a river, right, and keeping resources from people, we want to deconstruct the whole dam, but we don't have the time, energy, or resources. So what we have to do is figure out which stick to pull when. I'll pull these two sticks, you pull those two sticks, and then something can happen. So once you've identified the leverage point and who else you need to know, or you've done your ecosystem mapping, then you can do your organizing specifically with an anti-racism lens. Look, people talk about Saul Alinsky being the godfather of community organizing. We were organizing in pens in Africa on slave ships when we got here. I come from the Underground Railroad, Central Maryland. We've been doing that for 200 years, right? Saul Alinsky did not have a racial analysis when he started talking about community organizing. He thought it would fracture his power base. If you don't have a racial and equity analysis about community organizing, you are not doing community organizing in America, no matter how many power levers you're touching. So I'm going to invite you all to think about having an organizing-centric approach that has a racial equity lens that allows you to speak plainly and clearly and map out the power dynamics and relationships, not only about our story, because we know people love black culture, but hate black people.
Hello.
And so we get a lot of money made, but it ain't our money. It ain't our ownership. And if we're not having that question, we're playing games.
And so I'm going to tell you the reason why our social club community network is a part of Performing Our Future. Primarily, it's because our social club has been telling this story for over 100 years. 100 years worth of history, 100 years worth of membership, 100 years saying that we are going to preserve our history and our culture, and we are going to do it by providing live entertainment, by preserving the way that we dance and we are going to participate in intellectual conversation. 106 years of doing that, which for me, in my own simple analysis as a cultural organizer, it shows how you can build wealth and power. That looks different and does have something to do with race because that's the reason why the Art Social Club developed itself. Folks came from the South, and I'm going to tell the story, we're going to get to the questions. Folks came from the South, and this is a story that I heard from the men of the club, and people were fellowshipping on the street. And in the midst of fellowshipping on the street, they were harassed by the police. It's interesting, you come from a rural areas, open space, so people gather. You come into an urban space, the space looks different. People are still doing human behavior in their gathering. So black men decided, and this was during the time of segregation, that we have to come together and we have to get our own place and we have to feel our own power for our own people. And that's what the Historic Art Social Club represents. And the Art Social Club Community Network primary focus is to preserve that history, to preserve that idea of empowerment, working together and putting your money together along with your skills and abilities to keep moving things forward. And the network just added some other components. That's the story of the Art Social Club. And so we're going to move to questions. So we have, it's 7:31. And now we can have a conversation. Okay, Ben.
So quick facilitator's note, since we don't have a lot of time and we know there's a lot more ideas in this room than we're going to have time to discuss, want to ask you to do us a favor, take some notes on what you're talking about, on the questions you got and the opportunities you see. Put them on the back of these. So you can take these with you. Take these with you, the power map and this info. Leave these with us. And on the back of it, write down the questions that you've got and especially the opportunities you see. And if you want to work on this, put your name next to it so that folks from the network can follow up with you about it. And then we'll talk about as many as we can, but since we won't be able to get to all of it, we'll be able to keep that and follow up. Does that make sense? Cool.
So we'll go around the table and you can respond to either one of the questions or both and say what you have to say, write it down and pass it to the next person, please. Anybody want to start? Okay, go ahead.
You writing this or we're discussing? Are we writing this down on the paper now?
Yeah, if you have any questions or you see any opportunities, you can say it. And you can also write it on the paper.
If you got time to say it, awesome, but we're just not going to get to everybody, so write them down so we don't lose them.
We're going to get to as many people as we can. Say what you have to say, write it down, and then pass it to the next person. If you don't have any questions, then just pass it to the next person, and we'll just keep passing. That's my
So 1, 2 for folks, and then anyone else just raise your hand. I'll try to make that. So I'll see 1, 2, 3. Anyone else? 4. Okay, no more hands for a moment.
So for the question that I have is, what can y'all see that we can do to collaborate our groups? Like, how do you see us being able to turn our groups into interdisciplinary units? So instead of working separately as individuals, material financing, business, and everybody else with their own unique individual group, how can we put those together? How can we make something new out of this? What do y'all see that could become new and could be very efficient for our community, if I say that? Because I know everything's great individually, but I promise you together we can go very far.
That's a great statement.
Does anyone want to respond to that really quickly? Really quickly. I'll just think on it.
So, just I can show, just in general, as a general answer, the nature of the work that we do is to have different stakeholders, as he speaks to, rather than be in a silo. They understand the areas of their overlapping interests, and that overlapping interest allows for a stronger community foundation for addressing cooperative activities. So rather than saying, this is what you should do, we say, have conversations now to understand where the overlapping interest is let that overlapping interest serve as a foundation, a platform for you launching into your new aspirations. Yeah, and we can serve as a vehicle for allowing that to work efficiently, but you have to do that among yourselves.
Dr. Nago.
Just to understand your statement. You're saying find the commonality so that you can have a building spot?
Yes.
Yes, coordination.
So the commonality helps to build the coordination?
Yes. We have fancy names such as academia, right? You
Yes,
know, enlightened self-interest, you know, interdependency, but that's all it is, commonality.
Excuse me. My imagination tells me, or gives me the impression this is a nuanced process. Is that it's not, that the day is just the beginning of this grouping, or, so my question is, and that's an assumption I'm making, is this the beginning of an ongoing process toward development of what we're talking about, or this is just a one-time meeting with this group, like a large focal group to get information, and then you can do something else with another group later?
So can I try to answer that? It's all